Hello, and welcome to the Vicars Watch Dibley.
The podcast where real priests link our stories to those of a Reverend Geraldine Granger and other TV vicars. I'm Kate.
I'm Ruthi.
And today I'm interviewing Ruthi, having a chat with her, getting to know her a bit more in the final of our interview series.
Hello.
It's so wonderful to be here. It's just me and thee, Ruthi, today.
I know. It's weird. Where's Jenny?
Where's Jenny? Well, today Jenny had a bit of a diary conflict with us. She works very hard.
And we don't.
We don't. Well, the reality is actually Jenny and I both had equally full diaries and couldn't find a time which we could both do.
So you get me instead.
Well, anyway, we thought what we would do we'd do the third of our interview series so that you could all get to know Ruthi a little bit better in the way that Jenny and I know her. So we're going to go through some of the questions about life and faith, which both Jenny and I have already answered. But I thought to get us in the mood today, I'd begin with some quick fire questions for Ruthi.
How romantic.
I know. So, these are all going to take the form of X or Y, and some of these will be easy choices for Ruthi, and some of these, I'm hoping, will be a little bit more difficult.
Oh no. What's the consequences for not choosing them? Are they just erased from the earth or something like that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Let's
brutal.
make it a Room 101 situation.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I love that show.
It's a good show, isn't it? Okay, so Edward Ferrars or Edward Cullen?
Edward Ferrars.
Yeah. Paramore or Pulp?
Paramore, absolutely. Especially now I've had my hair dyed, I look even more like Hayley Williams.
Mr. Darcy or Poldark?
Oh, tricky.
Russ
That is
Poldark.
tricky.
Obviously.
Ross Poldark. Mr. Darcy. I love Ross Poldark. He has more problematic issues than Mr. Darcy does.
Wickham or Willoughby?
Ooh, who's the better villain? The trouble is, they did the series Lost in Austin, and they changed Wickham's character in that, and who was really, really great. And he had different motivations, and it made it a bit more complicated. But Willoughby it changes character, but then he is always about the money. So I've got to keep Wickham. I think it is. You just know he's a snake.
Gravy or gin?
Oh, gravy. Okay. I do love gin, but I love gravy so much more.
Peter Pan or Robin Hood?
Oh, tricky. Because I did have one of my birthday parties, I dressed as Peter Pan and everyone else came as other characters from Neverland. But I think I've got to keep Robin Hood. The Disney version was one of my granddad's favourite films, and there's just so much more diversity with Robin Hood.
Yeah, okay. Beauty and the Beast or Tangled?
It's Beauty and the Beast. I love Tangled too, but I don't have a Tangled tattoo. I do have a Beauty and the Beast one.
Chips or cheese?
Cheese, because you could have potatoes in so many other varieties that are also good, but to get rid of all of cheese is criminal, I think.
Okay. Guitarist or bassist?
I mean, what I would like to be or what I prefer in a band.
What you prefer in a band?
I mean, you kind of have to pick guitarist, but bassists just add so much more to a band. But most of like melodies and riffs come from guitar. So I can't get rid of all bass, but I can't get rid of guitarists. Can't get rid of solos.
Isn't your partner a bassist?
They play both.
They both.
They play both. So that's fine. We'll just get rid of the bass. We've got more guitars in house than we have basses. So yeah.
Emo or metal?
Oh, my teenage heart hurts, but I've got to go metal. Yeah, got to keep the metal.
Austin or Bridgerton?
Austin. I love Bridgerton, and that hurts to wipe it off, but you can't get rid of the OG.
Here's one which would be legitimately hard for me. Colonel Brandon or Colonel Fitzwilliam?
As in Colonel Fitzwilliam, as in from Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah, I have a very soft spot for Colonel
I
Fitzwilliam.
do too. He's a lovely chap, isn't he? But Colonel Brandon, I've got to keep because of all his patience and loveliness. Yeah.
Okay. Luke Skywalker or Obi-Wan Kenobi?
Oh, that's mean. This might be the trickiest one of them all so far. I mean, it is the Skywalker saga, so it'd be very hard to have Star Wars without Luke. But equally, it'd be very hard to have it without Obi-Wan Kenobi. I'm going to have to keep Luke. But that one hurts the most, I think, so far.
Ashoka or Anakin?
Oh, got to keep Ahsoka. But then Anakin's key, isn't he? I'm quite niche, aren't I? Well, not niche, but these questions are quite niche. Some of these you'll be going, what's an Ahsoka?
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, she is Anakin's Padawan.
Yeah, watch the Clone Wars series. The like animated show. It is fantastic if you're into Star Wars. I'm changing my mind. I love Ahsoka, but you've got to keep Anakin for the story, and Anakin's so much better in the Clone Wars series. Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, it's got to be
Good. Inigo Montoya or Wesley?
harking back to the Princess Bride. Wesley is such a romantic hero, as wonderful as my name is Inigo Montoya. He killed my father. Prepare to die. Is
Geraldine Granger or Hermione Granger?
Oh, it's got to keep Geraldine as much as Hermione is wonderful. The author of Hermione is not a great person, but Hermione is a wonderful character, and I think one that probably both of us empathised with very much in growing up and going, oh yeah. We like Hermione, but it would be very off-brand for me to keep Hermione over Geraldine Granger.
Narnia or Neverland?
Narnia, 100%. I wrote some of my dissertation on Narnia and the Chronicles of Narnia, so I've got to keep that.
Ice cream or olives?
Ice cream. I don't think my son could forgive me if I got rid of... He loves olives as well, because apparently he's a very posh middle class boy, but I couldn't get rid of ice cream.
Sushi or chippy? Now, I'm going to... I'm prefacing chippy. It was originally going to be sushi or saveloy, but you are since now vegetarian. So,
I did love a saveloy dip back in the day, though. We used to, every time we went up to Sunderland matches, because my family are all Sunderland fans, we'd go for a saveloy dip at Jackie White's Market. I love a chippy tea, and it would be my favourite food. But if we're talking about wiping it off the planet, I think more people would be angry about sushi going. So very unselfishly, I will get rid of a chippy tea in order that large parts of Asia and Everyone else can have one of their food staples.
Okay.
Sorry, Brits.
Edmund Bertram or Henry Tilney?
Henry Tilney, obviously. Next question.
Mighty This is the last one. Mighty Boosh or Taskmaster?
Oh, that's so difficult. That is so difficult. I love the Mighty Boosh, but I love Taskmaster as well. And if I keep Taskmaster, I still get Noel Fielding, so that's fine.
Yeah.
I'll keep Taskmaster. Those are great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, I thought it would help us get into it, but also for our dear listeners, just to learn a little bit more about you and your interests as well.
Yeah. And how you've started this episode with me being immediately judged by large numbers of our listeners.
Judged by me as well in occasional places as well.
Which one did you disagree with the most?
Luke or Obi-Wan, I would say Obi-Wan. 100%.
Would
You've
you?
still got Leia at the end of the day.
Oh, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Also, Obi-Wan is just my truest love, so...
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, that was tricky. That was a very tricky one.
Well then, shall we move on now to talking about your life and your faith? So, shall we begin with, well, the beginning? How did you come to faith, and where does your faith journey begin?
That's always a tricky question for me, I think, because I don't have the lightning bolt moment that I think some people have. And I think a lot less people have that lightning bolt moment, and faith is much more of a gradual thing for them. So that's okay. That's fine. So I grew up in a Christian household. Dad was a vicar. We were up in Preston when I was born. And so God's always been a part of my family, and I've always known that God is someone to talk to, and God's just always been a part of my life. So, I mean, I did do the thing, the very evangelical thing of praying the prayer at one point, but I can't particularly... I remember saying to Dad I wanted to be a Christian or something like that, but I think I was very much like already there and saying prayers before bed and reading Bible stories, and it was never really a doubt thing for me as a child. So it's just always been around, really. Kicking about, hanging out.
Yeah. So you mentioned saying prayers and reading the Bible. So did you go to church as a child?
Yes. And the advantage of being the vicar's kid is that you can lead a little pack of other children if they're in the church and get up to mischief. And I remember very much when we moved to Bradford when I was about 4 years old, I think it was, and playing hide and seek after church. And I hid once behind the organ, which was very, very dusty. And yeah, was always at church. I think I remember once, this is skipping ahead a bit to being a teenager, and asking Mum if I could not go to church that day, and it was absolutely not. Of course you coming to church. So yeah, that was never really given as a choice, but I think that was probably a good thing for me.
So what did faith as a teenager look like?
So as a teenager, I went to, we'd by this point moved to Royal Leamington Spa, which after living in Bradford, felt a bit of a fish out of water for kind of most of my time, I think, in Leamington. And then we moved to Stratford-upon-Avon, which is even posher. Which I remember my dad's got quite a broad northeast Yorkshire accent crossover, and the first service that we were at in Stratford-upon-Avon, we were sat in front of two older ladies who clearly didn't realise the new vicar's family was sat in front. And Dad was up kind of speaking and introducing himself, and there was this voice behind us. I just can't understand a word he's saying. So that was the introduction to that. As a teenager, when I was back in Leamington, we went to a church that was probably quite a conservative evangelical church, as we might describe it today. Had a fantastic youth group and was really involved in that, and had some brilliant youth leaders who really helped me shape and own my own faith, and saw potential in me, which was really great. I think some of the teaching that I received was damaging in some ways, looking back now. I don't think it was intended to be, but at the time there was a very kind of strict view on how people should look, how families should look, how like, lifestyle and everything should be, and there wasn't the kind of openness that I have much more now. I was the emo kid as well, and I always felt a bit different to the others, but always got along with people and chatted, and was part of the youth group fully, and was given lots of opportunities to be involved in church stuff, so it was good.
So, aside from not really having a choice due to your parents, what was it about church, and what particularly was it about Jesus that kept you going and kept you faithful during those teenage years?
I think it was just kind of part of my being was going to church and knowing that there was a bigger plan in life and a bigger person in life who had control of stuff. In a way, as a teenager, you feel so out of control of other things, and knowing that there was someone above going, there's a plan in all of this, or I can make a plan from all of this, because I'm not completely convinced with the whole kind of everything happens exactly for a reason, and reasons can come from it, but I'm not sure I agree that God just does things to us all the time. Anyway, so I think it was just always part of me that about God being, and part of that as well was telling others, and the importance of having this support structure that was God, and knowing that God loved me and cared for me, and wanted to love and care for everyone on earth. It was very much just part of my bloodstream, just part of the way that I grew up. And so I was always inviting people to youth groups and to stuff at church, and as a kid inviting people to church, because that's just that's just what I knew to do. And I think my parents were fantastic in and in helping me own faith. And it was, I'm sure I had times of questions and asked awkward questions and things like that, but I can't particularly remember that. It was always very much this is what God is, and it's an important part of your life. And perhaps that sounds very dictatorship to other people, but I think for me, as my parents knew me, that's what I needed at that point before I went kind of, I'm very easily distracted.
And you mentioned maybe feeling a bit like an outsider during your teenage years. You were the emo kid, the kind of alternative kid.
I'll dig out some photos.
Particularly in a church context. But did you find, did that have any sway over your relationship with God as a teenager at all? Yeah,
I think it's so. When I was in year 8, I struggled with having friends, and my best friend had said something about she was going to be a goth, and I thought, with the kind of teaching that I had, that automatically meant she'd start worshipping Satan, and therefore I couldn't be friends with this person. And so I suddenly lost kind of my whole friendship group. It meant I found another one, and I basically played tag every lunchtime with a group of lads that I got on with. So that's what I did. And so I was known as the kind of churchy kid and was very outspoken and about my faith in things like RE lessons, and would, talk about that, and was always a bit of a nerd as well. In the what were they called? Yearbooks. The end of the year, I won the award for Teacher's Pet in year 11. So I was very much that. I think I had, again, I think probably from having a mum who was a teacher, a respect of authority and a respect of teachers, and maybe I was a bit of a suck up as well. But I, yes, I was always kind of a bit different and got bullied a bit. Nothing too bad. But I mean, if you're a vicar's kid, you're ginger, you're a bit of a swat. I mean, that's three things very easily that you can get picked on for. Yeah, and so never quite felt I fitted in the same way that I did in Leamington, but found friends and had a really lovely group of friends in secondary school and into sixth form, and got on with people most of the time, but always felt a bit kind of distanced, I think, partly because of my faith, actually probably mostly because of my faith and the kind of boundaries that I'd put around me, for good or for ill, meant I was kind of separate from others. But desperately trying to fit in. I mean, it's being a teenager, isn't it? That's what being a teenager's like.
And you mentioned the move sort of from the north down further south. I'm just wondering whether you had almost an inverse experience of me, when my family moved north when I was 4, and I kind of, one of the things that made me stand out was my parents had southern accents, so I had a bit more of a southern accent. And I'd be kind of, that would be noted by my peers. Did you have that inverse where, what was it like having a northern accent in the South?
I had a proper West Yorkshire accent, and then it got softened by being in the Midlands, and I'm desperately trying to regain it back. And so I think you kind of assimilate, don't you, to fit in with where you are. So I think I would have changed. I changed how I spoke a bit more in order to fit in. But I think I always do that automatically. I think I just kind of like mirror people in different ways, and so pick up on the way that people speak and the way they act, probably to. Oh, I feel like this has turned into therapy a little bit. Probably to feel more comfortable and part of what people are doing. I felt like a right fish out of water. I hated primary school when I was in Leamington. I went to the primary school in Warwick nearby, and just because I went in the second term of year 5, so when I was about 9 or 10, everyone already had very strong friendships established, whereas I came in as the new person. Whereas my brother had a really great time there, because actually he came in year 3, I think it would have been, and so he was still able to form friendships where I was still very much out of the circle still.
Thinking back again to that moment where you said, right, I want to be a Christian. I mean, recognising that maybe you'd always been a Christian to some degree through your upbringing. How did life change after that?
I'm not sure it did in many ways. I think I had my I got confirmed later on as a teenager, which is something we would do in the Anglican church. Whereas, if you've been baptised as a baby, or you might have called it christened, you kind of have confirmation, which is sometimes used as an introduction to communion quite often. And I did that as whilst I was in Leamington, and got done at Coventry Cathedral, which is a really amazing cathedral, a really great history with it. And I had a lot of friends who were Baptists, and so for them, they hadn't got baptised as children, and so they were getting baptised as teenagers, and people were making a big deal about this and having parties and that kind of thing. And my confirmation felt a bit of a letdown in some ways, because, I mean, it was in a big cathedral where, some of my family with their, I can't think of any friends particularly who came. It was me and another teenager who both got done at Coventry Cathedral, and so it felt very distant. And we did go have a chippy tea afterwards, so that was great. But it was never as big a deal, and so I felt really disappointed by that, and was like, oh, okay, it's, I've done this thing. I mean, I now got to take part in communion, which was great, and a very important part of my faith now. But yeah, the kind of moments that are supposed to be significant for us, they didn't feel it in the same way, I think. Whereas again, my brother got confirmed in the church we went to, so everyone was there and people we knew. Honestly, Phil, this is outrageous. You've done so much better than me in so many ways. But yeah, just a very different feeling to that. But I think youth groups more shaped me and helped me to own my faith a bit more. And did you ever do the Numa videos?
Yeah.
Do you remember those
Yeah.
with Rob Bell?
I've got them all on my hard drive.
Have
in
you?
the hope that I'll one day be able to use them.
I have used them with you sometimes, and they're a bit like, what's this old guy? What's with his hair? Because he's got the blonde spikes.
Oh my goodness, he does.
Yeah,
oh,
so
no,
early
Ruthie
noughties.
would become old.
And so doing things like that and kind of, well, it would have been engaging with theology without me realising that's what I was doing. And I think particularly theology, when it's actually got relevance and, there's practicalities for it, was important for me growing in my faith. So those were the things that helped me to grow more, I think, rather than the maybe expected key points.
And you'd mentioned that sort of at this point you started to get more opportunities for being involved in church and I suppose leading things. So what was that journey like? And when did you start to realise that leading and teaching and caring for people in a church context was something God was calling you to do?
So I think I was probably involved in leading services from a young age, and whether that just be like I did the prayers with mum or something like that, or was quite often used as a sermon illustration by my dad, which is the peril of being a vicar's kid. For various different things. And I remember one Sunday we had the youth group led the service instead, and so I kind of took on the vicar role for this, and had a crib sheet and had prepped and practiced with the curate and all this kind of stuff, and maybe the signs were there nice and early. And I used to go and help with the children's groups quite a lot, mainly because then I didn't have to listen to the boring sermon and sit in church, and that's why I wanted to go out and hang out in the youth group, in the kids groups. But again, was a good thing for me because it was that's just now part of me, that I love working with young people and children and helping faith be relevant for them and hearing their stories. And so I was always in church but out of church in order to go lead and do different things there. And then my kind of realisation that that vicar stuff was something that I wanted to do happened. There was a service called First Sunday that happened at the local Baptist church that was a service for young people, and the music came from the local college people who were training to be worship leaders, and so we're all there like, oh, everyone's cute, and teenage girl stuff. And someone came and talked, and I have no idea what the sermon was about or what we sang or how cute the worship leaders were that particular time. But I just remember this voice. Oh, not even a voice. It was just a thought that would not leave my head that was, I want you in ministry. I want you in ministry. I want you in ministry. And I thought, that's really bizarre. So I went and talked to my youth leader about that. And he prayed for me and prayed in tongues, which I'd never particularly heard before, which was cool. And I thought it was a youth ministry. I thought that's what I was called to do. But the more I kind of explored it, the more I was like, no, I think I'm supposed to go get a dog collar. And yeah, I mean, we could talk about, some more about that, but those were kind of key changing points as a teenager, that particular service. November 2008, was it? I think, yeah, 2008. Yeah.
So, kind of then from that point, knowing that that was a trajectory God was calling you along, what happened next?
So talked to my dad about it, and yeah, after that service, I said, things have happened. I think I need to talk to you, but I'll talk to you tomorrow. And Dad said, you've been whacked with the Holy Spirit, haven't you? And I said, yeah, I think I have. So I then started talking about it and got in charge of the got in touch with the vocations team eventually for the diocese. I think I talked to the vicar first as well and things like that. Thankfully, although I was in a kind of conservative evangelical church, not so conservative that they wouldn't allow women to be leaders in the church. So tick, that's good. I'm not sure Mum would have let us go to that church if that was the case. Nor Dad, but Mum especially. And so then I started exploring vocations and whether I might be called to be a vicar or a priest. Well, same thing but different. And yeah, one of the first meetings I had, I went and saw a lady who I think must have been a young vocations minister. And she said, you do realise if you go down this path, you may never marry or have children. And I was 17 or 18 at the time, so that was a bit of oh, okay, that's a lot of life decisions being made for me very quickly. And I went on things like, it was a conference called Call Waiting, and that was the first time I met some people who were like, if you're a woman, you can't be ordained, you know, you shouldn't be on this and that kind of stuff. And I decided to explore whether I wanted to work for a church, and so thought, instead of I would have been applying for university at this time. Instead, I said I'd take a year out, go work for a church and see if I actually like it. Because if I don't, then this isn't what I'm supposed to do. And so, thankfully, because my dad's a vicar, I had lots of other vicar pals around. And so we found, Dad emailed his buddies and said, does anyone want a charming woman to come and do an internship or a placement for a bit. And the very lovely Philip Mount Stephen, who at the time was vicar of St Michael's in Paris, said, yeah, sure, does she want to come to Paris? And of course I immediately said yes. So that's where I went to kind of explore the calling a bit further.
Great. So then, once you'd kind of had decided and you'd put yourself on the track in terms of the Church of England, what was a vocational journey? So how did you go through selection? What was training like, etc.?
Yeah, so I started in Coventry Diocese, which is where my family were, but then I took this year out to go to Paris. And well, it was supposed to be 3 months, then it was a year, and then it ended up being 2 years where I explored. I worked for this church and just had such an amazing time. And yeah, there were lots of challenges with it and difficult things as part of it too. But there was, yeah, it just became clearer and clearer to me that this is something that I wanted to do and was called to do. So I knew that I probably ought to go and get a theology degree, because that would be the easiest thing to help if I was going to go along those lines. So I had applied for university and, yeah, did a theology degree and went to York St John University. So I kind of picked up the vocation process officially when I'd moved to York, so I was then in York Diocese. And so the paperwork that had been started in Coventry was moved up to York for me to pursue more. And yeah, it took a long time, but I was, 20 when I was started at university in York. And if you're young, they can sometimes take their time. And it was in my final year of university. In the December, I went on my panel, which was a BAP then, but I think it's called something different now. Jenny would know. I don't know what it is. Basically, the one where they say yes or no, whether you're going to go train for ordained ministry. And I went on that and got a yes, which was exciting and fantastic. And then I went to visit theological colleges afterwards. But soon after I got that yes, I had my first really bad bout of depression. I think partly one of my triggers for depression, which I think I've had for years and years and years, and probably struggled with as a teenager but didn't have a name for it. It's lots of change in life, and therefore something that I've been building up to for about 5 years by this point was finally, yes, let's open the door. I had a really, was not good with depression, couldn't get out and about, was just tired and exhausted and frightened and just in a really different place. And that was the first time I started taking antidepressants as well, which I've been on and off for years now as well. So the kind of my vocational journey and working out, I had depression, have depression, will always have depression probably, are kind of tied in lots of different ways.
Thank you. So you had that pause, but then you started training.
Yeah.
So
up at the wonderful place of Durham at Cranmer Hall, where I met, some all right priests, some that I quite like hanging out with still and, doing podcasts with and that kind of stuff. So I went up to Durham, which I wanted to stay north, and in York Diocese, everyone's sent to Durham. That's the running joke, because the Archbishop at the time, Archbishop Centenary, was keen that people stay in the north, and we didn't lose everyone to the south. But I think I would have picked, I did wonder about Trinity Bristol for a bit, and did have a look at Nottingham, but Durham has family connections for me as well. It's where my dad grew up, and so it was nice to be in that place and that city and amongst the people of the northeast who I adore. So yeah, it was good.
So you did 2 years at Cranmer Hall. We started at the same time, but because you'd already done theology, they put you on an MA track, didn't they? So
no, they wanted to put me on an MA track, and I said no, because I am not academically gifted, I think is the kind way to put it. They wanted me to do a master's, and I really resisted, because so I did a postgraduate diploma because I'd already done a theology degree, but I didn't feel the need to get anything like a master's. For other people, that was great, because their learning goes that way. For me, it didn't. So I've only got a PG dip.
It's not only. Well, so you did your 2 years, and then you went into curacy and ordination. So got ordained in York Diocese. Did my first was at my first church for curacy, and for a whole number of factors that didn't work out. So after 18 months of being at that church, again I had a really bad bout of depression, and anxiety got added into the mix with this one as well, which is just a brilliant combination. And so I ended up not working for about 3-4 months, and moving to a different church to finish my curacy. And I was newly married at that point as well. So in the October we'd got married, and the February the next year I'd finished and moved on, and suddenly was a hollow shell of a person of who I used to be.
And yeah, suddenly I had to pick myself up from that and go through to the next curacy where things worked out a lot better, and I had a great time, and made some really good friends and learned a lot of lessons from both places. But yeah, it was a challenging time as well.
Yeah, and after you finished your curacy, you made the decision not to find a parish job, but to embody your priestly ministry in a different way. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so at Cranmer Hall, I met my lovely spouse who got drawn from the south to this northern bird, and ended up in York. And by the time it was looking for us to move on from curacy, we had our son, who was about a year old by that time, and so it made sense for one of us to be the vicar of somewhere, and the benefits of housing and stuff that come with that, and then that the other one would do something different. And because I'd drawn them up from the south, it was decided that my spouse would go and find the job. And so we've ended up here in South Yorkshire, and we were looking for things to do. And I was thinking about, what do I like doing? I like telling people about Jesus and that Jesus is pretty great. And I like working with young people. And the job that I currently do came up working for Missional Youth Church Network. And it's about creating church with young people that and by young people that's engaging for them. And I work quite a lot of the time at home. I work part-time, so I can tag team in and do nursery and go to toddler groups and all that kind of fun stuff as well. I do residentials as part of it, and my priestly ministry is being exercised in a different way. I'm still doing stuff in parish in a more kind of traditional vicar role. Like I've got a funeral booked in for a few weeks' time, and do services and things like that as part of what I do here, just kind of outside of my paid work. But in my in the role that I do with Missional Youth Church Network, I can talk to vicars and can have the language of talking about being as a priest and encouraging them to be involved in youth work and building church that works for young people, because I was a bored teenager in church, so I think there are still quite a lot of bored teenagers in church still as well. So I do something quite different now, which is good.
So, looking at where you are now, as a fully fledged priest, embodying that in a really exciting way, and if you look back to that moment as a teenager where you felt you heard God say, I want you in ministry, I want you in ministry, I want you in ministry. So what would you add to that slightly confused, bewildered teenager? What would you say to her?
It's going to be right, don't worry. God will settle it. And that first lady was wrong. Like, you've managed both, tick tick. And I remember someone else saying this, and I thought it was really wise. Just because you're called to be a priest doesn't mean you're necessarily called to be a vicar. And he hasn't done vicar jobs. And priestly ministry can be exercised in so many different ways. Some of us are called to be vicars, and that is something that I may well do again in the future at some point. But actually there are so many different ways that priests can be and need to be. So if you think about chaplaincy and involvement in hospitals and hospices and schools and prisons and all these different places where you have chaplains, actually being God's presence in those kind of different environments is so important, and there to answer questions when the big questions of life come up, and just to be someone praying in those places as well, and doing a role in a different way. And I get to be a priest just in a different place, and that's really exciting. And there's a pioneering aspect to it as well, which is terrifying at times. And you're like, I would just like to be safe sometimes and just know exactly what I'm doing and have a 9 to 5 job and go in and work in an office, and when I leave the office I leave all my work there. But that's not how it works when you're a priest, and when you're someone who just loves people and engages with people and wants to know about people and wants to let them know how special and loved they are by God in their lives, whether it's someone who's really struggling and is down on their last legs, is struggling with addiction or whatever it might be. Letting them know how loved they are is so important to the same person, to a person who is, high flying and it seems like everything is okay, but there's a deep loneliness in them. Actually, it's important that we have priests in these different places who are able to talk.
Thank you. And what would you say the highs and lows of being a priest are at the moment for you?
The highs are the points that come out of nowhere and you just think, this is why I do this job, or this is why I've been called to be this person. And, that might just be you're just in the right place at the right time for a conversation, and you're able to bless someone with your in a priestly manner as part of that. It's doing things like doing the Eucharist is just cracking and great. I love subverting people's expectations about what a vicar might look like. So I was at the hairdresser's the other day, but the hairdresser knows that I'm a vicar, and I just ended up talking to someone opposite in the salon who their brother had committed suicide, and just talking and being able to bring God into that and doing that. And then my hairdresser saying, yeah, she's a vicar, she's the coolest effing vicar you'll ever meet, which is always nice to do. The challenges of that at the moment, I think, are there's a lot of change in the Church of England, and there are a lot of rules to be obeyed, and part of that is really important, and part of that is essential to be accountable. But there's times where we mess up and do not look accountable, and things have gone wrong, and we need to hold our hands up and say sorry and do things better. But all the things that have happened recently with living in love and faith, which is something that we've been working through, and our understanding of marriage has really challenged me recently. And where I was kind of theologically with that as a teenager, I think I probably would have, I may well have been in a place at one point where I thought if someone was gay, they were sinful, and would I have gone so far as to use that horrific phrase of pray the gay away? I don't know, honestly. I might have been one of those people, and then I've gone on a journey of going, okay, it's not sinful to be gay. And I think I would have just thought of this in men being attracted to men, cis men being attracted to cisgendered men as well. And I've just gone on this massive journey with it all, and seen God's love move in people, and see just how the Spirit can work in people. And do you know what? They're not always cisgendered heteronormative families that we are expected to. We were reading a passage today this morning as part of work, and there was a line about, who am I to hinder God? If God's moving, who am I to hinder God? And I feel a bit frustrated with that at the moment, where I think, I can see God moving in this, and why are we hindering God?
Yeah. After just that frustration at the organisation to which we belong, do you have any recommendations, encouragements, warnings for those who are exploring a call to ordained ministry as part of the Church of England, but also, I guess, more generally exploring any call?
I think it's really important to note that God has called you as you are. And yes, there are bits that there might be chips on your shoulder that need knocking off, but that doesn't mean your entire personality and who you are needs to change. And, as a woman called to be a priest in the Church of England, I don't suddenly need to smell of lavender all the time and have the Anglican bob cut and wear pastel colours all the time, because that is not me and that's not who I'm called to be. And actually, those things that are part of you, that God may well have called to be a key part of your vocation, are so, so important. And, being known by your hairdresser as the metal vicar who's effing cool is such a delight. Admittedly, a bit of an ego boost as well, because I know I'm not the coolest vicar in the Church of England by any stretch of the imagination. But actually being recognised as normal and just, this is part of who I am, and that's so important. So if you're exploring vocations in whatever way, shape or form that might be, know that God's calling you and all of you. And yeah, as I said, there might be stuff that needs to be dealt with, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all of you needs to be dealt with. And changed, why did we... It was partly why I rebelled against doing a master's. What has my academic ability have to do with being a priest? Sometimes we're kind of pushed into this sausage factory. Well, we called it vicar factory, didn't we? This is the mould of the vicar that you must fit. And we fitted too many people into those moulds, and it's either broken them or it's meant that they've not things have gone wrong. And also, I would say as well, it might not be a vicar that you're called to be, or a priest that you're called to be. Actually, you might be called to serve God in so many different ways. And in some ways, having the piece of white plastic around your neck make it easier. In other ways, it doesn't. And vocations needs to be thought of more than just are you going to be a priest? But actually there's so many different roles, and actually being part of Church Army now, as I am, there's so many amazing roles as part of Church Army that I just think this would be so fantastic for these different people. And do you know what? You don't have to be hindered by being called Rev as part of it as well. Yeah, there's lots of hope and there's lots of excitement still. And you find your fellow rebels to hang out with.
So is there anything else that you'd like to share or talk about as we come to a close?
Sometimes the church gets things wrong and makes mistakes, and it's hard for the church, as in the bigger institution, to admit to that. And it's frustrating when you can see that those mistakes have been made. And there's nothing necessarily that you can do about it. But kind of going full circle back to not thinking God has... this sounds wrong, not thinking God has a plan for everything. Not kind of believing in... what's the fancy name for it? Where predestination, that, everything happens for a reason. Actually, everything can happen for a reason, but sometimes things are just a bit rubbish because they're a bit rubbish. But it doesn't mean that God can take that situation and make it absolutely fan-bloody-tastic and better than he thought it could ever be. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Vicars Watch Dibley. Thank you to Toby for editing our ramblings.
Any views expressed in this podcast are our own and don't necessarily represent those of the Church of England or any other organisations with which we are affiliated.
And as always, bless you for listening.
Did you know that Peruvian owls hunt in pairs?
I didn't know.
Yeah, it's because they're in cahoots.
Yeah, I love it.
In cahoots.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant.